Welcome back to Good Law, Bad Law. We have a very special episode today. My guest, former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman of New York. Congresswoman Holtzman was the youngest woman at the time ever elected to a Congress. She was elected to the House in 1972 and almost immediately went to work on the Judiciary Committee's investigation of President Nixon. Ultimately, she became one of the lead sponsors of the articles of impeachment against President Nixon. She's had a legendary career since then as district attorney for many years in Brooklyn, other elected positions, and also as somebody who has spoken and written forcefully throughout the years on the subject of impeachment. Having come from the experience she had during Watergate, she's continued to be a very powerful voice on the subject of impeachment. She actually wrote a book 2 years ago called The Case for Impeaching Trump. So she's been on it long before we dealt with the horrible events of last week, the assault and insurrection on the United States Capitol. Congresswoman Holtzman and I discussed where we are, why there needs to be accountability, why the impeachment of President Trump was necessary and he needs to be convicted now in the Senate, and why there has to be investigations to get at the truth, because we've lived in an era of lies and we have to get at the truth in order to heal, in order to restore our country. I know you're going to enjoy this episode with Congresswoman Holtzman. It was a great honor to speak with her and have her on the program. So stay tuned for this important episode of Good Law, Bad Law. It's my great honor to welcome former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman of New York to the program today. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being on Good Law, Bad Law. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Very glad to be talking to your listeners and to you.
So for those who don't know but should know, let me just give a very brief summary of your background, Congresswoman. It would be impossible for me to do justice to everything. I actually referred to you to a friend of mine when I was excitedly reporting that you were going to be on, that I was going to talk to a legend. For those of us who lived through Watergate and have read extensively and studied Watergate as I have, I mean that sincerely, but you got your start as a lawyer for the Wachtell-Lipton law firm in New York City in 1965, and then in 1972, you became the youngest woman elected to Congress at the age of 31, immediately joining the Judiciary Committee at a very important time and a relevant time for our conversation today, as you were one of the members of Congress who recommended articles of impeachment against President Nixon. And while in Congress and then after, you worked on so many important initiatives, including initiatives against the war in Vietnam and in Cambodia, the Equal Rights Amendment, legislation to expand the effort to expel Nazis who came illegally into this country. In fact, my very first article as a journalist, before I became a lawyer, was an article about the Office of Special Investigations in Washington at a time when Patrick Buchanan was attacking that office of the Justice Department. So this is a subject near and dear to me. And you were then a law professor after your time in Congress. You've been a law professor, the district attorney for many years in Brooklyn, the comptroller in New York City. And you've frequently spoken and written about impeachment, arguing against the impeachment of President Clinton, arguing for the impeachment of President George W. Bush. And you wrote a book in 2018, as I understand it, horrified as many of us were at the separation of families at the border that this president initiated, and so many other things about his term as president, even before we get to the events connected to the election on November 3rd and the aftermath and the assault on Congress, on the Capitol just last week. So that's a very short summary, I know, but with all of that and all of the perspective you bring to the subject of impeachment, to the rule of law, and to the importance of holding everyone, even up to the highest office in the country, accountable, what are your impressions, just as we get started here, what are your impressions about the House impeaching President Trump just a couple of days ago?
Well, I watched the impeachment hearings, the impeachment process, gavel to gavel. I actually wrote about it beforehand in an article that was published in the New York Daily News. I think the House acted appropriately. It acted in a bipartisan manner. It acted constitutionally. And it's imperative that it did what it did, because we have a president who incited violence against the Congress. And it wasn't just violence against the Congress because he had something in it for Congress. It was violence against Congress as a means to install himself illegally as president of the United States. In other words, he triggered violence in order to improperly, illegally become president, overthrowing the vote and the will of the majority of American people who voted. I mean, his actions were one of the most blatant attacks on our democracy that I can think of. And it was horrific. 5 people died. Members of Congress were terrorized. And he's unleashed a whirlwind. The people whom he urged and egged on and incited are still frothing at the mouth. They are still planning outrages and violence against our government. Stop and think about where we are today. President-elect Biden used to take the Amtrak every day to Washington, D.C. when he was senator. He did that for many, many years. He wanted, as a nostalgic measure, to travel to his inauguration by Amtrak from Wilmington, Delaware. It's a short trip, maybe an hour and a half or so. I've been on the Amtrak from New York City many times to D.C. It's a very short trip. But the Secret Service has told him that it's unsafe for him to take that short trip. Where are we as Americans when the President of the United States is facing that level of terrorism that he can't take a train to his own inauguration? Think of all the presidents of the United States who took whistle-stop tours around the country without fear for their lives. And we've come to this point in 2021 where the president can't take the Amtrak train with all the Secret Service and all the guards to Washington from Wilmington, Delaware, because it's too dangerous to his life?
Well, it is eerily reminiscent of what we know about Abraham Lincoln when he was coming to Washington, and he came by train, and there were plots to kill and kidnap and kill newly elected President Lincoln as he was on his way to Washington for his inauguration. That's where we are. We've seen nothing like this since the Civil War, since the actual Civil War in our country's history.
Yes, and it's terrifying. I mean, most Americans had no idea that these threats and this right-wing horrific conspiracy theory and was really a serious problem for the whole country. Somehow we all thought it was somehow localized, not something that could engulf us all. But here I am, a former member of Congress. I've been to every single Democratic inauguration since 1970, since Carter was elected. And I'm concerned about going to this inauguration for the first time.
Right.
I mean, if we can't have peace in this country, what kind of country do we have? And so, I'm very, very, very troubled. That's not to say that these forces weren't there, but Trump galvanized them, gave them legitimacy, and encouraged them. And he said, I'm going to walk with you to the Capitol. And he intended to walk to the Capitol because he wanted to be part of leading them to the destruction of our democracy. And he gave legitimacy to these insurrectionary forces. And that's why he needs to be removed from office. He is a clear and present danger to the United States. He is a clear and present danger to our democracy. But removing him is not going to be sufficient. Of course, we know that the removal process won't take place because the Senate won't meet till after he leaves office. But he needs to be convicted, and he needs to be disqualified from further holding of office, and he needs to be investigated for purposes of criminal prosecution by the federal government in connection with this insurrection. That seems to be the minimum of what we need to do. But then the larger question is, how do we extirpate this insurrectionary fervor from our people, and how do we defang these insurrectionary movements in this country, which are violent and terrifying?
Well, Congresswoman, how does accountability, and in particular, so far we're talking about holding the president accountable, how does accountability fit into that? You heard a lot of calls from, frankly, most of the Republicans in the House, not so much defending Trump, but arguing that we need to move on, just let him go, it's time for unity. I mean, where were those voices weeks ago and months ago, for that matter? But all of a sudden, it's don't pursue impeachment because we have to have unity in the country. On the other hand, I think accountability is essential to getting to a point of unity in the country. How do you view impeachment of President Trump as a step in the direction towards healing and towards dealing with the broader problem of Trumpism, if you will, or the positions that so many in Congress took, calling the election a fraud and that the election was stolen and all of that, which has caused so much damage. What's the role of accountability, starting with the president, in that process, do you think?
Well, accountability is important, but I would phrase it in a slightly different way. I would say that impeaching President Trump is the beginning of an important process to make clear to the American people, including these insurrectionists, including these domestic terrorists, that as a country, we function under the rule of law. And what that means is that anyone who violates the rule of law, whether it's the person who picks up the garbage or the President of the United States, they both have to be held to the same standard, which is if they violate the law, they must be punished, because we can only function as a society if people obey the law. If they don't, if people start taking the law into their own hands, we have mob rule. We have what we saw at the Capitol, which is disgruntled Americans took weapons and arms, and by violence were going to change the will of the American people in a peaceable election. So this is a process not just of accountability in the narrow sense. Mm-hmm. This is a process, first of all, before it was to remove a president who could declare another insurrection, could instigate and incite another insurrection. If Congress weren't moving to impeachment, if that weren't serious, do you think Twitter would have taken him off Twitter or Facebook taken him off Facebook? And don't you think if he were on those platforms, he could have done the same thing again? So, number one, the impeachment effort was to stop further violence. But the impeachment effort and the conviction of Donald Trump will say that we are a country of laws and that no one is above the law. And whether you want unity or disunity, if we are not a country of laws, we cannot function as a democracy. We will have no democracy. We will have lost the most precious thing that we have, which is the Constitution of the United States, which creates a system whereby we resolve our differences, and the framers of the Constitution knew there would be serious differences. There were differences of opinion in the Constitutional Convention. We would settle these differences peaceably, and that's the primary and critical message to come out of impeachment. And I wanted and conviction of him, aside from disqualifying him and making sure he never holds office under federal authorities again. But I want to go to Watergate because we had some of these same issues in Watergate. And the thing that's different about Watergate is that, and scarier about Trump and the times we're in, is that Nixon committed his crimes, and he did commit crimes. He was named as an unindicted co-conspirator by the Watergate grand jury.
Right.
And his top officials were all not just indicted, but convicted of a variety of crimes, and went to jail. The critical thing is that Nixon knew that what he was doing was criminal. So he did it surreptitiously. He didn't go out and say, oh, I'm going to get the CIA to stop the FBI investigation, or FBI, you stop your investigation into the Watergate break-in. He knew he couldn't do that because that was criminal and people would object. But fast forward almost a half a century later, Donald Trump is doing everything in the open. What does that tell you about how far we have descended as a country, that he has no fear about inciting these crowds, about whipping up these lies, and whipping up a crowd that was going to undo an election? Well, Nixon wanted to undo election. That was the whole purpose of the break-in. I'm not saying he didn't want to stop an election. That was the basic problem with Watergate. That was what he was trying to do, to prevent Democrats from winning and winning the election himself. The same thing as Trump, but Trump did it in the open. Well, that's right. I mean, Nixon may have denied he did wrong, but he never tried to construct an alternate reality narrative about it. He covered it up. He knew it was right because he had to at that time. But now we don't have to cover it. The president doesn't have to cover it up. And maybe the cover-up is the alternate reality he's created. But I wanted to go to a different point. Yeah. I just want to point that out because to me it's very interesting that big difference. Nixon had to commit his crimes in secret. Trump is committing his crimes in open. But the thing is that the Republicans way back when did some of the same things that these Republicans are doing. They said, there isn't enough evidence. So when we voted, the House Judiciary Committee voted for articles of impeachment, we had 7 Republicans with us, which was a big number, but most of the Republicans refused to go along. They said, not enough evidence. We don't know 100% for sure, guaranteed. I need a stamp that says he 100% did it. Right. Well, finally, the tape of the White House tape recording, where he orders the CIA orders his staff to get the CIA to stop the FBI investigation, comes out, and every Republican says, "Oh yeah, okay, this is irrefutable proof." Well, every one of the holdout Republicans went along and said, we're voting for the impeachment of Richard Nixon now. It was unanimous sentiment for impeachment on the Judiciary Committee. And that's what triggered Nixon's resignation, because there was no hope. If every Republican on the House Judiciary Committee said he should be impeached, along with every single Democrat, including Southern Democrats, there was no hope that he wouldn't be convicted. He saw that. So what we have in the House Judiciary Committee was unity. Why did we have unity? Because the Republicans were willing to acknowledge the truth of the facts in front of their eyes. Finally, there was conclusive evidence. There is conclusive evidence here. We have videotapes. We have audio tapes. We have Twitter accounts. We have it all out there. This time, the Republicans are pretending that they don't have enough evidence. We need to do more. This process is too fast. We need more information. What more information do they need? The president called the people to Washington. Come on January 6th, and it'll be wild. So he wasn't calling for a peaceable action. Wild. He was addressing them in words that they understood. And then he incited them by the lies about the election was stolen. It's stolen from you. It's stolen from the country. We have to do something about it. Take America back. He incited them, and he incited them to do violence, and he knew they were going to do violence. And it doesn't, in fact, even matter what was in his mind. His actions created this danger, and from the people who've been arrested, they said, Donald Trump, as reported in the media, Donald Trump sent me.
He told us to do it, right?
He told us to do it. He was going to walk with us there.
Well, and you're right.
What more legitimacy do you need if you're committing a crime? It's then to have the president walk with you. It's like Nixon. Nixon said if the president does it, it's legal. So if the president's going to walk to Congress and force Congress to change the votes, then that's legal. Anyway,
you're right.
So
I think it's a great point.
This idea of unity based on nonsense is wrong. We had unity in the Republicans came around, and we had unity on the House Judiciary Committee, which forced Nixon's resignation, and we had unity in the country. Mm-hmm. That's the critical thing that people don't remember. Impeachment did not divide the country during the Watergate impeachment process. At the end of it, when Nixon resigned in the face of certain impeachment and removal from office, the country was unified. Why? Because everyone understood, a few holdouts, that what we shared as Americans wasn't simply our decision that Nixon had to go, but Nixon had to go because we are a country that believes in the Constitution and the rule of law. And
so fast forward then today, because it is scary and daunting to think about the aftermath of this. You're absolutely right. That the incitement didn't begin on January 6th. The big lie that Trump has been telling, sort of like grooming somebody before, sexual assault. It takes some time, and he's groomed these people, his base, his supporters, with lies, with clear lies, for so long that they're going to continue to believe what they believe. And that brings me to the next part of this, which is he's not the only one who has perpetuated the big lie about the stolen election and massive election fraud and all of the rest. He's got, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley in the Senate and a lot of others in the House who voted to not certify Joe Biden, claiming the same false claims, making the same false claims about the election. So we don't know the full story yet about things like some members of Congress, there have been reports, gave tours of the Capitol to some of these insurrectionists the day before the attack. We don't know the full story of that, but it's going to come out. But just as Trump has been out in the open, we didn't have to go to the Supreme Court to reveal the things that Trump has done, and we don't have to go to the Supreme Court to reveal what the Ted Cruz's and Josh Hawley's and the 139 or whatever the number is in the House who have also contributed to what occurred on January 6th. As a former member of Congress, I mean, what do you do about that? Does there need to be accountability as to them and their role?
Yes, there does. But frankly, the most important thing is to try to demythologize and defang and destroy the myth about the President of the United States. That's the primary issue here, because he is the one, he's the one who originated this whole mess. He's the one who created the mythology. They were just, carrying the banners. They couldn't have done anything if Trump hadn't started this. So, I think that we need to find out exactly what their role was. Some of them may have coordinated with some of the insurrectionists. One of the people, I guess he was arrested. I'm not sure whether he's arrested or not yet arrested, but one of the people involved said that he was coordinating with 3 members of the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of that stuff has to be investigated. There has to be political accountability first for the president under the rule of law and under the Constitution to establish that the rule of law still is operational in the United States and the president can be held accountable. Because if we can't hold the president accountable, how can you hold his acolytes and his supporters and the people who acted on the basis of his claims, of his urgings, of his incitement, and not hold him accountable? You can't do that in fairness in a country. It can't just, it's like, a mafia operation. I mean, right. I was a DA. You're just gonna prosecute the shooter who goes out and engages in a mob hit, but you're not going to prosecute the mob boss who tells him to shoot? No, that doesn't happen in our society.
I think that is an appropriate analogy, and you're right. I agree. I mean, you can't prosecute the lieutenants and not prosecute the head, the mob boss. But at the same time, Trump couldn't have gone as far as he went without those lieutenants, without those in Congress who joined him and supported him, and despite being leaders in their own right in the Congress, in the Senate, in the House, they perpetuated those lies and allowed them. So
I agree, but I first of all, I'd like to know what their role was completely. I mean, I think that has to be, and I think it is you can't do everything at once here.
Yeah.
The FBI has a huge job. We had them, how many people were at this rally? Maybe several thousand, trying to attack the House of Representatives. They've got to find these people and arrest them. They've got to also investigate each one of those cases. They have to find out who organized and planned these things. I mean, and they have to deal with the president and his top people. And it's not only the president, it's Rudy Giuliani and the other lawyers who are up there and other members of Congress who are up there. People who were up there at that rally may all be criminally responsible and liable. But, that seems to me to be the very first. The second thing is some members of Congress who may have actually collaborated and conspired with the insurrectionists and with trying to get this rally going, they could present a clear and present danger if they did that, and they have to be held accountable immediately under criminal laws, and maybe expelled from Congress if it's found that they were in fact conspiring with the conspirators. I think the first thing is to deal with the violence that is imminent and that's been threatened, and to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
Then we can hold a whole battery of people responsible. But I think the larger issue in the end is, what do we do about the Americans who are susceptible to these kinds of lies? And here I blame the media. I blame large media outlets like Fox News for perpetrating the lie and giving a megaphone to Donald Trump. Look, Donald Trump, we know that this was organized from the get-go. Donald Trump knew that he was going to lose this election. and because they saw the polling and they saw that Joe Biden was going to win, and they figured out the only way to do this to beat Joe Biden, they're not going to beat him at the ballot box. They're going to beat him outside the ballot box through illegal methods, and that's why Donald Trump tried to get states not to count the mail-in ballots when they came in. Remember, some states, because of the pandemic, knew that there were going to be lots of mail-in ballots. They should have been counting them right away. They do that in Florida. They do that in other states. But Trump's plan was, if I can separate the mail-in ballots from the people who come to vote on Election Day, I can say that those mail-in ballots that came in later were fraudulent. That was the plan from the beginning, even before the election took place.
Well, I'm in Pennsylvania, and I know, and it's been too little stated, it was a Pennsylvania legislature that allowed the expanded mail-in vote, and it was a it was a Republican legislature in Pennsylvania that expanded the mail-in vote, and it was the Republican-controlled legislature that said you can't count them, you can't start processing those mail-in ballots until Election Day, which I believe they knew would mean delaying the ultimate vote count in Pennsylvania and the chaos that could create.
That was the plan. That was Donald Trump's plan, and I'm sure a full investigation, and there should be either a 9/11 commission that brings this out or else a full criminal investigation that brings this out. But this was the plan because they knew they were going to lose, and how could they show that the election was fraudulent? Because if they just attacked the mail-in ballots, which is how they proceeded here, then they could basically attack the ballots that were coming in from Democrats, because more Democrats would come in, would use mail-in ballots, because Trump would tell his people, Republicans, do not vote by mail-in ballot. It's going to be fraudulent. You just vote. If you want your vote to count, come in and vote on Election Day. And that's probably also why he was, now coming to think about it, why he was poo-pooing wearing the mask and the seriousness of COVID and all the rest, because if people were really afraid of COVID, then he couldn't get the Republicans to show up in person. So, this is a big plot that he had going way back. This wasn't something he cooked up on January 6th. This wasn't something he cooked up when he said in his tweet, come to Washington, it'll be wild. No. This went back, way back. And so the people who were involved in planning that, this is a criminal effort to try to undo a valid and lawful and legal and peaceful American election. And now we have violence of the kind we've never seen. It may force the president-elect not even to be inaugurated outside. They've already canceled a rehearsal for the inauguration. I mean, to be confronted with this kind of violence is, it's staggering. And this is a serious problem. And Donald Trump has to be, he's the one, the major culprit here, because while these forces were all lurking, he brought them together, he incited them, he organized them, and he gave legitimacy to their expressions of violence. And we just go back to Charlottesville, where he said they're fine people on both sides. Fine people are not neo-Nazis, would-be Nazis, KKK people, Proud Boys, people who are bigots and violent, the militia people, and the rest.
Well, and while the violence was going on last Wednesday, he while it was happening, he posted a video saying "We love you" to these insurrectionists. So it is something that goes far back and runs deep. And as you're pointing out, this is creating a very full plate for the Justice Department, for incoming President Biden, for the U.S. attorneys around the country who are going to have to prosecute these claims, for Congress, for all the inspectors general, at a time when the new president's going to have a very full plate with very urgent other issues, COVID and economic recovery and so on. But what do you say, Congresswoman, to those who say, yeah, he does have a full plate, President-elect Biden? He's got to get his cabinet approved. He's got to get COVID relief going. He's got to get this vaccination rollout done correctly. I mean, there's a lot to do. But what do you say to those who say this is going to distract, prosecution and all the efforts that we've been talking about are going to distract from what Joe Biden's got in front of him otherwise? How important is it, in other words, that Congress and the Justice Department do all of these things?
Because we are a country that can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we did that. They made those same arguments about the impeachment of Richard Nixon. The country couldn't stand it. It was distracting. We couldn't handle it. I say that we will not be able to survive as a democracy unless we reestablish the rule of law in this country, which is severely under attack. And Joe Biden's legitimacy as president will be challenged all the way through unless this is set to rest. And I think, I did a lot of work on uncovering the presence of Nazi war criminals in America and bringing them to justice, deporting them, and so forth. And I know this is a very inflammatory analogy, but after World War II, one of the most important things that we did was there was a denazification program in Germany.
Right.
They had to root out the allegiance, the love, the belief in Hitler as a cult figure, because Germany couldn't survive without that. It couldn't. You can't have this at the heart of the United States. People who no longer believe in democracy. People who want a strong man above the law, who can destroy, be president without the majority, take over the Congress, take over the Supreme Court, attack all the institutions, dismantle our government. How can we function? How can we go forward? In a way, as important as everything else, I think that this is fundamental. We are a country that is founded on the rule of law, and that rule of law is under attack in a very serious way. And it's under attack not just in one state, but in every state. 50 capitals are now under threat of assault and siege by these domestic terrorist insurrectionary forces. When else in America did this happen? Yeah. We can't. This is war. Right. They wanted war. They call it war. It is war. And we can't just ignore it and say, oh, unity. Unity will happen when most Americans agree that the rule of law is more important than a single president and more important than a political party. It is the heart and soul of our country. So that's what has to be restored and protected, and the idea of it has to be firmly entrenched in Americans. Otherwise, you think Donald Trump will be the first and only? No.
Well, I don't think it is inflammatory to refer back to post-war Germany. Hitler told a big lie, and a series of big lies, and the denazification. I wrote a book about a Nazi war crimes trial as my last project as a journalist before I went to law school. Denazification and the prosecutions in Nuremberg, not just the major Nazi figures, but the trials that followed, they were necessary to establish the truth.
Correct.
And we have lived through 4 years of, we might kindly refer to it as an alternate reality, but in reality, it's a series of lies again. And I don't know how you have any kind of restoration of the rule of law, of basic, respect and trust for the institutions that kept this country what it has been, without getting at the truth. And I think it's a totally appropriate comparison. Even if
I think that's vital, and I think that's what unifies our country, and that's why, going back to Watergate, when President Nixon was reelected in 1972, he was reelected with one of the biggest landslides in American history. After the hearings, and of course, Nixon denied that it happened and denied any connection with any of the illegalities in the break-in and blah, blah, blah. It took Senate hearings it took the House Judiciary Committee hearings, and it took the resignation of Richard Nixon. By the time he resigned, after the facts came out, carefully, deliberately, methodically, a year and a half later, from his approval rating, which must have been in the high 70s, by the time he left office, less than 25% of the American people supported him. That's where we need to be today. Right. That's where we need to be with Donald Trump. The country was unified after Nixon resigned. They were not divided. They were unified because in the end, they saw that the facts justified his removal because they saw the facts of his behavior, which was criminal, which was an assault on our democracy. And that's what they need to see with regard to Trump.
Congresswoman.
An educational process as well as a process of punishment and a process of protecting us from the violence that he's inciting and the violence of his founders. It's not a complete solution. It is the beginning of the solution.
Well, for the millions of people who still believe whatever they believe just because they've been hearing it from Trump and others for so long, we have to stand for the rule of law and for the truth. The truth has to come out. And prosecution...
Well, it's not going to come out without the effective, without holding Donald Trump accountable and then his minions accountable and the people in Congress who assisted him accountable. All of that is vital. But the accountability for members of Congress will come when the American people fully understand the degree to which he endangers our democracy. He, Donald Trump, endangers our democracy.
Well, Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, thank you so much for taking time to share your experiences and your perspectives and to describe what I believe and agree is absolutely vital in the coming weeks and months ahead for our country. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on Good Law, Bad Law.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure talking to you.